Hello and thank you for joining us today for our latest webinar, How Leading Firms Manage US Hiring. My name is Ian Giles. I've worked in payroll for the last 25 years. I've had roles in all kinds of industries, from retail and beauty to aerospace, in all types of businesses, from startup to matrixed environments across the globe. I've provided leadership and strategies to populations of more than 100,000 employees in over 170 countries. Today, I'm the payroll strategist for Papayaglobal. Papaya provides payroll, payments, and workforce management to all employment types in over 160 countries. I work across the business, managing and building external relationships, supporting enterprise clients and solutions, and acting as an advisor. I'm really pleased to say I'm joined today by Francine, David, and Jasmine. Francine, would you like to introduce yourself and Pearl Cohen to the audience?
Thank you, Ian. Delighted to see everybody here this morning. I'm Francine Alfanderi. I'm a partner at the firm of Pearl Cohen based in New York. I graduated from UC Berkeley and Harvard Law School, licensed to practice in New York and California. Pearl Cohen is a law firm with affiliate firms in the UK, the US, and Israel. We represent primarily technology companies, although not exclusively, and many of our companies have their roots outside the US, and we are accompanying them in their growth and development within the US. Delighted again to be here today.
Okay, thank you. Dave, can you introduce yourself and venture to the audience?
Absolutely. Thank you, Ian. I am here today on behalf of Venture Employer Solutions, America's leading HR and PEO provider. We are currently servicing about 7 million American workers as well as their dependents, both directly and indirectly. We specialize in PEO, which is professional employer organizations, focusing around tech companies, both here in the United States, as well as those expanding into the US from abroad. Needless to say, I'm thrilled to be part of this panel today and to begin the discussion.
Okay, thanks very much, Dave. And by no means least, Jasmine, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Thank you, Ian. My name is Jessamine Berman. I'm the Director of Legal and Compliance here at Papayaglobal. I'm an attorney and I oversee all of the US operations, our commercial deals, payments, and in addition to that, Papaya was also one of the founding members of GEO, the Global Employment Innovation Organization, which is trying to set standards across the board for all of the hiring that we see internationally and domestically. And I'm the chair of the Government Affairs Committee there. I'm also a member of Tech GC. And at Papaya, we are active in 160 plus countries. We make sure that we have the best ICPs available for your EOR needs. We also have our own payments handling, always great to have this happen in a live moment. We recently acquired Ozimo, which is a licensed money transmission entity, and for that reason we're able now to handle payments ourselves, so your payroll fees are also kept down. So very excited to be here with so many other specialists in the field.
Okay, thank you all. In terms of housekeeping, we're going to keep it really, really simple today. I'm going to keep an eye on the chat window for any questions and comments that might kind of like come up. Whilst we're going to do that at the end and get to as many of those as we can. Whilst we wait for others to join, and we're going to give people another kind of like 30 seconds, 60 seconds or so, please feel free to use the chat window to tell us where you are all today. I'd love to see how far and wide the audiences are when we hold these kind of events. So we'll just, like I say, give everybody another 30 seconds or so, and we'll just kind of like leave it there for the moment. Right, well, we have a Poland already. Fantastic. We're all very, very quiet today. Up, Canada. Netherlands. Buffalo, Portugal. We're getting them from absolutely everywhere. Okay, I'll keep an eye on that whilst we're actually going through, but let's kind of get started. So During the webinar today, we are going to be walking you through the stages of hiring in the US, a guide to setting yourselves up to succeed, if you like. We're going to discuss recruitment. So we'll look at job advertisements, interviewing and screening, and employment agreements. We'll then go through employment types and classification, and then we'll move on to understanding the hiring landscape. High-level overview of employment, state-specific laws and how they can differ, managing the variability of state-specific laws, and operating across multiple states. I want to start the webinar on a serious but light note, and I'm guilty of having done that in the past. So we'll move on to the recruitment side of things. These are all things that do happen and have happened in the past to various different peoples. You don't have a workforce until you've recruited it. The recruitment process varies between states as well as globally, and the hiring manager can ultimately be the reason that this goes south. They might think they're having an informal conversation, a really nice friendly chat, asking lots of you questions to the candidate, whereas in fact, they're actually breaking the law. So let's open this straight away to the panel. Francine, a pointer or two from you, please. What should we be doing and what should we not be doing?
Well, especially what we should not be doing. So even before you get to that interview, the employer might post that there's a job available. You might post on LinkedIn or Indeed or other websites. And be aware that there is a new trend among the US states and cities, which require employers to give an idea of the salary range for the position. That started in Colorado, and it has spread like the wildfires that we've seen this summer. So when you're recruiting nationally, you will probably have to say, this position's salary will be X to Y, a range of $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, and make that clear. That's called salary transparency. So that's a new trend to be aware of. In addition, when you're detailing the qualifications, you need to be aware of potential bias, particularly on the basis of age. You cannot say 3 to 5 years experience, because that could be excluding people with 23 to 25 years of experience, who may be just as qualified as somebody with only 5 years under her belt. Similarly, a phrase such as digital native could be viewed as code for a person under the age of 30. So those types of wording are prohibited by the laws that prohibit discrimination.
Okay, thanks very much. And to your point on salary transparency, I'm hoping it does get a lot better than I've seen. I don't think $20,000 to $2 million is a fair level of transparency. And for those of you that aren't operating in the US and are actually operating in the EU, watch out for the EU Pay Transparency Directive. This is not just in the US and staying there. I think it's definitely headed on a absolutely global level. Dave, is there anything that you'd add to what Francine has said?
Yes, I would say that, especially in this sort of global world and remote world, where people are oftentimes conducting interviews from the comfort of their couch or their living room, kitchen table, many times the conversations get very casual. And I think that we should stay focused on the fact that we are still, in fact, in an interview. And the questions that we're asking need to remain professional. So some of the pitfalls that we're seeing right now is asking people about how old they are. I hear you have children in the background. By the way, are you pregnant? Do you plan on having more children? Who's going to watch your children when you're at work? Do you have help? These are all questions that should be avoided and not asked, because they don't really reflect the qualifications of the candidate. But we're seeing these type of questions being asked a whole lot, and they really need to be avoided at all costs, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. In total agreement. I don't think the cat walking across the laptop kind of like, conveys the professional image that we want to. And I think that does open us up to a much more informal conversation. Jasmine, anything that you would add as well?
Yes, I want to go back to your point, Ian, about the range and the salary. it has to be realistic. This is something that we're seeing regulators in the US really harp upon. You can't say, oh, everywhere from 20,000 to 2 million. Really make it realistic. Companies can adapt to this by giving geographic ranges because the New York market may be different than what you see in Colorado or Seattle. So you can still be practical in your approach. I would not look at the laws as something to be scared of, but come at it from a perspective of how do we embrace this and empower our internal teams. Similarly to what David was saying about the questions and the casualness of the interview, you're here to find somebody who's going to support your team and your company. At the end of the day, what matters most to you are the professional qualifications. You want to be asking the question, what is their management experience? So as long as you stay on track to that, it can go well. And remember, this person is still a stranger to you. So approach it in that manner. And also make sure that for your internal teams, you're sharing feedback. This will allow your teams to really adjust to the questions that are being seen in the marketplace right now, because there's a lot of value even in the types of questions that the potential employee is asking of that hiring manager. For example, we're seeing a trend of employees asking questions like, is there anything in my resume or background that would exclude me from this position? That can definitely be a loaded question, something you're not familiar with. And these are great topics to speak with your legal advisor or somebody who is your vendor in the space.
Okay, thank you. Just thinking about it, there's maybe one more piece of advice that I would kind of give, and I did allude to the number of years that I've actually been working for, but a standard script of interview questions, no matter who the hiring manager is, maybe an answer to some of the problems where people are freeballing and kind of like asking their own questions. So moving on to the employee agreement, as we know, we all know that the employee agreement sets out the terms of the employment offer. It includes the initial position and duties. It states reporting lines and the place of performance, the initial compensation package, salary, incentives, compensation and equity, for example, as well as employee benefits, although a general statement is quite typical. Employment being at will is another element, otherwise, unless it's negotiated, and a duty to comply with the employee handbook and other policies are in there as well. Frequently, there's a separate confidentiality agreement, which may include such terms as, you've guessed it, confidentiality naturally, but also incitement of inventions, the employer's right to use the employee's name and image in marketing and materials, a restriction on competition following termination of employment, subject to compliance with applicable laws. I've got my own opinions, but Francine, should businesses consider any of these nice to haves and things that they might not want to include?
That is quite a list that you just ran through, Ian. Thank you for being so comprehensive. The pain points that I see most often in employment agreements, and again, the pain often comes up at the end of the employment relationship, which is not what we're talking about today, are how clearly is the incentive comp spelled out? If there is a bonus opportunity, commissions, other incentive programs, that should be plain as the nose on my face. So clear that any third party with no knowledge of the company could say, yes, that person has earned incentive comp, or nope, that comp is entirely in the discretion of the company. It's not earned. So that should be very, very clear, including an annex if need be that spells out targets, milestones, payment dates, and so forth. You mentioned at-will employment. That is the norm in the United States. At-will means you, the employer, may show an employee the door anytime, and the employee may quit anytime. That is the general rule. Notice periods are not common in the US. There are other ways of providing a little amount of money to people upon termination of employment. So those are important. Confidentiality of the employer's information is key. The fact that everything the employee creates or does in the course of her employment belongs to the employer is also key. And post-termination restrictions on the employee's activities, very big area, varies greatly from state to state, and is also currently the subject of discussions at the federal level. So all big topics.
Okay, thanks, Francine. Dave.
And one thing to add, and Francine said it very casually, but I think it was brilliant, is she used the word discretion. So judging by the chat, we have a whole lot of folks here from Europe and the UK, where employees are given very nice, big, broad employment contracts. That is not necessarily the case here in the United States. And within our employment agreements and offers, you're going to find lots of words like at the employer's discretion, at such a time that the employer chooses, or at the employer's discretion to offer benefits, a compensation plan at the employer's discretion. This is going to be key in protecting the company and insulating the company from a potential problem in the future. And I think you're going to hear a big theme here. When you are drafting these agreements, it's really going to come down to your trusted advisors and your partners and your attorneys and, you know, different vendors that you use to ensure that these agreements are compliant and rock solid, that will not lead to a problem in the future.
I agree completely. To just jump in on both of what David and Francine have been saying, this is still a very fact-specific human endeavor. While it's great to see all these advances in AI and technology, and while, you know, you can order really easily with Amazon, these are things that are very different from when you're crafting an agreement for an employee. And while it can seem very straightforward, name, job description, location of the employee, but we're still in a post-COVID environment. We can still have companies have entities in multiple states, multiple countries. And if you are not a specialist in this area, you should be free to run your business, and you should have the external support that knows the back end of these details, and how having an employee that's in one state but supporting business operations in another state or another country impacts you in your taxes, in your legal obligations to that employee. For example, paid time off. There are certain states that if you do end that employment agreement, you have to cash out those days. Other states you don't. So these are things to know at the beginning of the engagement, because it's also going to influence what you offer.
All valid points. Thanks to all of you. So moving on to employment types and classifications, let's look at what they are. There is a difference, and it does matter to how you employ somebody. So thinking that it doesn't is definitely not the case. It does matter, and getting it wrong could cost you in many ways and many times over. Dave, can you explain the different types of employments for the audience?
Sure. Let's go back first and go to classifications. This is not a choice. This is a black and white decision that should be made internally and in conjunction with your employment attorney. Either someone's working on a project, or the company is providing them direction, and they are working on behalf of the company, not themselves. So when it comes to classification and misclassification, which we hear all of the time within the startup and tech ecosystem, this is really just a matter of not doing our due diligence up front and really laying out the groundwork. Now, once we expand into the United States, or if we're here and we are about to start hiring, we have a couple of different ways in which we can employ. Again, judging from the chat, we are seeing a lot of companies that are here from LATAM and Europe, in which case you may not be raising money in the United States. You may not be relocating a founder. You kind of may want to just test the water. You're not sure if you even want to be in the US. You might hire just a sales and marketing person, in which case you might choose to use what's known as an EOR, or an employer of record model, where a company will hire on your behalf. This is the simplest, easiest. There's no liability on you whatsoever. Alternatively, and this would be the majority of companies coming over from Canada, Australia, Israel, you're relocating founders. You are raising money in the United States. You know, I need to be in the US to succeed, in which case you will employ directly. You're going to need to incorporate. You are going to need an EIN number. and you're going to employ. And then once you employ, the big question is, do I want to handle everything myself and be legally responsible for it? Or do I want to do what, 85% and more of my peers do, which is work with a PEO that is going to assume legal responsibility for my payroll taxes, as well as HR administration. And also there's usually a tremendous amount of cost savings by going with a PEO, sometimes by as much as 65% versus doing it on your own. So again, your big options are we incorporating? Yes or no? If no, you have EOR. If yes, you have PEO or doing it yourself.
Okay, thanks, Dave. I think it's absolutely fair to say that there are definitely no gray areas here, so don't look for them. The best way forward is to work with people who can help you in every way, shape, and form. The two biggest factors that make each type of employment different to the others are that employees, as Davis said, they're protected by wage and hour laws. They're entitled to employee benefits whilst employed, and unemployment benefits when they are terminated without fault. They work under the employer's direction and control, whereas independent contractors are in business for themselves. In terms of getting it wrong, what makes the issue of misclassification so critical? It's the vast numbers of people that it impacts. There's got, as we can see, and as Dave has mentioned, we've got people here from all around the world. You might not think about the number itself. You might not know what it is. You might think it's small. It's not an insignificant number in the US. There are 51.5 million independent contractors in the US at this moment in time. And in most cases, misclassification is a product of money and responsibility. Some businesses are knowingly breaking the law, and there are some that are taking a risk-based approach, hoping that they'll never get caught. Classifying people incorrectly as contingent workers rather than employees simply makes things easier for them, and it's not the way to be doing it. Despite the violation of the law, it still continues. Then there are those businesses that lack knowledge, those businesses that really do need to be working with partners. They can be genuine but naive people and businesses who aren't sufficiently informed about the details and are not asking the right kinds of questions. They might not be using the right tools that are available to them, and they are definitely not working with the right people. So Dave, how do you suggest keeping misclassification out of an organization?
So the big answer is choosing the right employment attorney, just like choosing the right CPA when you come over to the United States. And you're going to find, and this isn't just for classification, this is also answering a question in the chat. This is also in determining, are these people exempt or non-exempt? Your PEO partner could also help with a lot of this, but it really comes down to choosing the right vendors. And when I'm talking about vendors, I'm talking about your employment attorney and your CPA, who are going to be your best friend throughout this process. And there is a reason that there are certain firms that are servicing 90% of the ecosystem. There is zero reason for you to reinvent the wheel and try to find a CPA or an attorney that no one has heard of, that no one has used before. These are the folks that are going to keep you compliant, and they could help you with every single one of these things within a matter of seconds.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Anything to add, Jasmine?
Definitely. You really want to vet your vendors, because this is going to be your ally. And also remember that when it comes to how you're working with an employee, that relationship can change. So for example, if they're hired one day as an EOR worker through a third party, and then they one day come to be, they decide to start their own business and they want to be an independent contractor, you can still work with that person, but the nature of the underlying agreement will change. So as your business grows, as your relationship with the worker grows, don't feel that you are locked in. it can always be adapted. That's why it's really important to make sure that you are in communication with your advisors. That way they can give you this guidance on the go. You should never be afraid to ask questions. Business is evolving, the way you work with your employees is evolving. Ask those questions so you can get the answers to keep you out of what we've all seen in the news, because regulators really are cracking down. And the reason behind it is they want to make sure that companies are not trying to avoid taxes or obligations to workers. And while that may not be your intention, this can open up a whole bag of issues that you don't want to be surrounded with. So it's always best to seek expert advice in these scenarios.
And Jessamine, you said something that the business does evolve. What you do on day one is not necessarily what you're going to be doing 6 months from now or even a year from now. So you could start off testing the water in the United States with one EOR salesperson, and within a matter of 6 months, be employing directly with 6, 10, 20, 30, 100 people. You're not locked into anything, and you could always make those adjustments and pivot.
Exactly, because when you are starting a business, you have enough to contend with, and also your costs are going to change. Your knowledge will grow, so that EOR worker can always become a direct employee. And on top of that, you will begin to focus and know what you need as a business. So that's why there are all these vendors in the space to support you as this growth occurs.
That's great. Just going back to a point that Jessamine said, don't be afraid to ask questions. The only stupid question is a question that's not asked. So there are people that are out there that will help. And just going back to Dave's point, there are lots of established businesses out there that are offering fantastic advice. Moving on, federal laws and regulations apply to everybody in the US. These laws are enacted by Congress. For example, there are laws that prohibit discrimination in hiring and employment on the basis of sex, race, disability, age, and other categories. In some cases, these laws may only apply if the employer has a certain number of employees in the US. Jessamine, can you share a little bit more about, and detail for those that might not be as clued up as others listening and watching today?
More than happy. So if you are not familiar with the US legal landscape, there's a federal level, which all the states have to abide by any laws issued by the federal government, but states then have the ability to actually strengthen those laws. So I'm going to start just with a few of the major US laws to just casually be aware of. You've probably heard of the word minimum wage. We've seen a renewed focus actually at the federal level at setting this new amount of a minimum wage level. Because as we know, states can vary directly. Maybe what somebody would have made in Montana would be significantly less than New York. So we've seen renewed efforts at the federal level to harmonize this, and that's being handled in the Fair Labor Standards Act. It's just something to be aware of. Again, you will get this advice from whoever you're working with as well. Another item to be aware of is the Immigration Reform Control Act, which also requires employees actually show their employer documentation that they're authorized to work for an employer in the US. And again, these laws are in place really to make sure that individuals are who they say they are. We are seeing, rises in identity theft. There's a lot of concerns on the back end, and these are just admin items that can be difficult for a brand new company to know about unless you've been doing it before. And it's okay to not have a full HR team at your disposal or a full legal team to run you through this. This is where a vendor can come in and say, hey, I have this checklist. Let's go through it one by one. Let's make sure we're asking this question, getting this documentation. That way you have all the onboarding materials on hand that if you were to ever be audited by a governmental organization, you can show that you did your due diligence.
Okay, Francine, is there anything that you add? You made a fantastic point earlier that I don't want to take away from you.
Anything about federal versus state employment hiring laws?
Yes.
Yeah. I think, as we just said, there are basic federal laws. You cannot discriminate on the basis of race anywhere in the US. But then individual states have enacted other laws that reflect that state's priorities. So, for example, in Michigan, you can't discriminate on the basis of weight. In New York City, you can't discriminate on the basis of height or weight. You can't say, that woman's thin, she's going to make everybody nervous, don't want her. Or that guy seems qualified, but he's kind of short. Tall men are viewed as more authoritative and more successful. Let's focus on hiring tall men. That's illegal in New York City, but it's perfectly legal elsewhere in the US, provided that the height and weight aren't based on some sort of illness or disability. So in recruiting a nationwide workforce, which many more companies are doing post-COVID, remember that each state protects its residents. Doesn't matter where the employer is based, where the person who will manage the candidate is based. Each candidate is protected by the laws of the state, city, and county where he, she, or they will be working. So it's really a very big point to bear in mind, and I can't repeat it often enough. Every law is different. Every state, county has its own laws that you have to be aware of.
Okay, thanks. Really, really important things to remember. Moving on to state-specific laws. Francine, for the layperson, the difference in the landscape between states can feel like a minefield. Have you got any advice for the audience?
First, just be aware of it. That's the main thing. That every aspect of the employment relationship may be regulated by a state. I always use minimum wage that we just touched on as the obvious one. Nowhere in the US can you pay less than $7.25 per hour to anyone. But some states have a higher minimum wage. Washington, D.C. is $17 per hour. And you may say, look, we are not, with all due respect, hiring minimum wage workers for our company. But I see it when someone says, hey, we don't have a lot of cash. Can I pay my new VP of marketing in stock options? And I'll say, if she's an employee, you got to also pay her minimum wage. You can't only provide stock options. So you have to be aware of these laws, even if you don't think they apply to your business. And again, just check the law of the jurisdiction where the person will be working, because there's a great deal of variation.
And to that point, it also comes down to sometimes the frequency of the pay. Again, our room is full with a lot of folks from Europe, where it's common to pay monthly. In many states in the United States, you might have to pay twice a month or even every other week, and in some cases even weekly. So all of these things come into play, but again, I'm going to go back to the fact that it's really going to come down to your vendors. When you're using a legitimate PEO, or obviously an EOR, of course, they will protect you from yourself with some of these things. So if you're attempting to pay in a non-compliant way, the PEO, if they're doing their job, should stop you from doing it. Now, if you're assuming all of that liability yourself and you're handling everything in-house, you're really going to need a top-notch HR team, as well as have your attorney on speed dial to make sure that you're not doing anything that might be out of bounds here.
Absolutely. Thanks all again. So operating across multiple states, getting one thing wrong is less than ideal. Getting a couple of things wrong, you kind of like get the point. The more you get wrong, the more complicated things will become for you. Wage and hour violations are often unintentional, but can come with steep penalties, liquidated damages, and even government audits. And they aren't the kind of things that you actually want to face. This is particularly important when it comes to non-exempt employees, i.e. those that are overtime eligible. Francine, can you expand on what we've kind of like said already? Are there any kind of like, tips that you can give the audience there?
Sure. So as we said, let's make sure that we know for hiring employees or independent contractors, two very different animals. If we are talking about employees and we're operating in multiple states, then many large companies simply take the most restrictive state laws and apply it across the board. A great example is vacation. People love vacation, but what they love even more is getting paid for vacation that they did not take. Some states allow an employer to tell an employee, look, you didn't take your 3 weeks this year, it's forfeited. Other states require the employer to roll that time over and even pay it out when the employment relationship ends. So some companies say, we're just going to be generous with everybody. Everybody gets their vacation rolled over. And other companies take a different approach, saying, nobody has guaranteed vacation. We're moving to flexible vacation. People take vacation when they need it, but they have no set number of days to which they're entitled. They have unlimited vacation. And that way, we never have to worry about how much vacation we're carrying on our books and which states require us to pay it out if the employment relationship ends. So that's one approach, just uniformity, taking the law that's most generous to the employees and using it everywhere in the US. One way to go.
Absolutely. Thank you. That sounds absolutely great. But if we look about, we're obviously talking about the US today. If you look at Australia, the PTO laws in Australia, kind of like tell us that if something isn't taken, for a number of time, an employee who hasn't actually had holiday recorded against their record for 4 years has the potential of carrying up to 100 days worth of holiday. It does vary completely around the world. So some form of uniformity is absolutely the right kind of direction. In addition to what we've mentioned, performance management of remote employees is extremely important for any employer to defend against claims of discrimination, harassment, and unfair treatment in a future dispute. There's a whole host of federal, state, and local laws requiring employers to publish or disseminate written notifications to employees, for example. There should be state-by-state variations of these notifications, but the good news is that intranet postings and or email circulation of the notices is something that is there and does mean that the employer has met their obligations. Employers need to confirm to specific requirements in everything that we've spoken about already today for their applicable jurisdictions and to determine a compliant manner for everything that they are doing. That kind of takes us into a conclusion. We've got 8 to 10 minutes up until the 3/4 of an hour that we've got. So before we get into the Q&A section, and we do have several questions within the chat already, what I'd like to do is to go through a conclusion and just round up some of the points that we've spoken about today. I hope everybody has found this both insightful and a good use of their time. Before we do move into that Q&A section, let's just recap on these points. So getting employee classification right is vitally important. It can be costly getting this wrong. It can be the difference between being in business and being out of business. I've seen tens of millions of dollars of lawsuits just in the first half of this year alone already because businesses are getting things wrong, because they're not using the right kind of partner to work with. Remember, laws vary between states. We see people getting this wrong all of the time. We don't see, we don't want to see anybody here today becoming another case. Compliance is key. There are no shortcuts when it comes to compliance, full stop. A workforce is the result of a recruitment process. Getting this right is the start of everything, whether or not it be the employee to the employer relationship or the business succeeding in business. That kind of takes us to the Q&A section of the webinar. I've been looking through the chat. I definitely know that Dave has too. So I am just wondering, Dave, whether or not there was a particular question that you'd seen in there that you want to take. And if not, I'll kind of ask a few questions and ask the panel to dive in.
So one of the questions that I saw, which I think is really great, and it's a phenomenal question, it's applying to everybody right now, is I'm a company that's in New York, but I have a remote employee in Miami or in Los Angeles. Do the rules of that state apply to me? And the answer is absolutely. And Francine and Jessamine could obviously jump in here, but it is crucial that you have an understanding of the state in which you're hiring in, which happens to be where that employee is working remotely.
Yeah, that's what we see. It's often a nasty shock to our clients when they realize they have to manage so many different state laws. And in addition, many states consider that if you have an employee in that state, you are doing business in that state. You have an office in that state, and you should be registered to do business in that state with the Secretary of State's office and paying in the state of California $800 a year for the privilege of having operations in the state of California. So there is additional compliance. As I say, you're saving because many of my clients don't pay rent anymore. They have a nationwide workforce, but what you're saving in rent, you may be spending a fraction of that in compliance with different state laws.
Exactly. And plus in the post-COVID environment or these hybrid workforces where maybe the office is in New York, but the employee actually lives in New Jersey, Connecticut, anywhere in the tri-state, you're going to see these issues.
Francine, we've got a question from Chuck, and it relates to salary transparency. Is it the responsibility of the hiring company only and also the recruitment company? Where does the responsibility lie in making sure that the job posting is exactly what it's meant to be?
Hey, Chuck, great question. That question would be decided by the contract between the recruiter and the employer. If the recruiter is assuming all responsibility for compliance with posting laws, then the recruiter's responsible. I have personally never seen that clause in a recruiter's agreement. So I would go with the default, which is the employer has to comply with the law in posting.
Okay, thanks very much, Francine. We have a question from an anonymous attendee. Do I need to have registered a company to start the recruitment process?
Great question. No, you don't, because you may not know what you actually want to do until you start meeting the candidates, right? So you might decide, you know, we are going to post this job posting out there. We're going to use Chuck, who actually is a fabulous recruiter, and he's going to attempt to get us some talent. You depending on who you're hiring and what you want to do, you might decide to go an EOR route, in which case you never need to incorporate at all, ever. You may decide to go a PEO route, in which case you do. Or you might decide, you know, I'm going to go a BPO route where I'm just going to hire someone to do this business processing outsourcing for me. I could use a firm like Papayaglobal or something like that, where they will build out a customer service center for me in Medellin, and they will field all of my questions. And then from there, I could see what it looks like in the United States and then start employing directly. So no, the answer is you do not need to register prior to recruitment.
Okay, fantastic. I think we've got time for one very, very quick question before we close out, which comes from Juliana. If her company is based in one state and she hires employees in another that work remotely, should the rules of the state that the employee lives in be applied? I think we kind of covered that already, but it's definitely worth reiterating again.
You are correct, Juliana. You are 100% correct. The answer is yes. You have to comply with the laws of the state where the employee lives and works. You see this a lot with, with the kinds of laws that vary from state to state, such as PTO payment, wage date payment, non-competition covenants. You have to comply with the laws of the state where the person is working and located.
Okay, thanks very much. We have now officially run out of time. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. I hope we've given you a lot to think about. I really and especially like to thank the panel for joining me today, sharing their knowledge and experience. If you do have a question after we close out or would like some more information on what you've seen and heard today, please reach out to us or visit the website where you will find a host of resources and content such as ebooks, videos, and blogs. Details are on the screen, but you can find us at www.papayaglobal.com. Again, thank you for joining us, and thank you to my panel.
Thank you.
Ian, thank you for moderating.
Thank you so much.